All right, guys, so the War of 1812 is over. Federalist Party's pretty much gone. Um, James Monroe is our new president, starting in 1816. And because the Federalists are gone, the Democratic Republicans, which are just now called the Republicans, take over. Pretty much they run our entire country. This starts an era called the Era of Good Feelings. There is really no physical fighting going on between us and any other country. We handle all of our problems through diplomacy, meaning we discuss all of our disagreements. One of the ones that we had was with Britain over what the northern border between Canada and the United States would be. Well, we make an agreement that it will be the 49th parallel. So this blue line right here, that becomes the northern border between British Canada and the United States. Another disagreement that we had was with Florida. The Seminoles kept coming over the northern border of Florida and attacking settlements in Georgia, and we could only chase them so far, or it would be seen as an invasion into Spanish territory. So what happens is we negotiate something called the Adams-Onis Treaty. Secretary of State, remember, war hero, Vice President, Secretary of State, chance to be president. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, who was the son of John Adams, negotiates a settlement over the land dispute. And in this treaty, the United States gets Florida. In return, you see where this green circle is over here in Texas. We trade that little bit of Texas for Florida. So we trade them that for that. Texas is right next to land that they already own, so that makes that theirs. And Florida is right next to land that we already own, so we just swap land. Meanwhile, in South and Central America, many rebellions are taking place against Spain. Most of them are led by Simón Bolívar, known as the Liberator. And the rebellions concern both Britain and the United States because we're afraid of new powers taking over in Central America. Because if Simón Bolívar is successful in liberating the country, they're a new nation, relatively defenseless. They might be conquered by countries like Germany or Austria or possibly France. So we're worried about this taking place. Britain and the United States are afraid of that. So the United States, President James Monroe, issued something on December 2nd, 1823 called the Monroe Doctrine. This political cartoon over here pretty much shows what we saw the Monroe Doctrine as. The Monroe Doctrine was pretty much, you stay on your side of the planet over there, we'll stay on ours. What it said specifically was that the Western Hemisphere was off limits to any new colonization. And any attempt to make a colony, a new colony in the Western Hemisphere, would be seen as an act of war on the United States. And we would not ignore it. Now, it doesn't say colonies can't exist. Like Cuba, Spain had owned it for a very long time, since like 1492. So we're not saying there can't be colonies, we're just saying no new colonies. During the second term of Monroe's presidency, we hit this major problem with the United States, but we compromised our way out of it. In 1819, Missouri's population reached that magic number to become a state, 60,000 free men. And Missouri applies for statehood. The problem was Missouri wanted to be a slave state. At that time, there was an equal number of free states and slave states. There was 11 free states and 11 slave states, meaning when a vote took place in the Senate, the number of free and slave states would be tied. Whichever side Missouri joins is going to give that side an advantage in the Senate, so that's a big issue. First attempt at solving the problem came from the House of Representatives. They said that Missouri could be a slave state, but that no new slaves would be allowed to be brought in. This was pretty much a useless thing because even though you can't bring new slaves in, it doesn't mean new slaves couldn't be born there. The Senate kills that bill. Henry Clay, we talked about him with the War Hawks lesson. Henry Clay was one of the War Hawks. He was going to become known as the Great Compromiser. Henry Clay gets us out of trouble so many times by making compromises that avoid civil war. He comes up with the Missouri Compromise. In this compromise, he says Missouri is going to be a slave state. Maine is going to become a free state. But there's another issue, and that's this line right here, the line of 3630. What the Missouri Compromise said is that there could be no new slave states north of 3630. Now, if you guys look at this really closely, you'll notice that all of this could eventually become states. And only that could become states. So this is going to lead to a major problem in the future. You can add a ton more free states to slave states. So even though it prevents the problem right now, it guarantees that it's going to happen in the future. The analogy I always use is like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It doesn't fix the problem. The Band-Aid, it might stop the bleeding. If you put bandage on a wound, a big bandage, not just a Band-Aid, but you put a bandage on a wound, it might solve the problem. But if you got the bullet in there, if you still got arteries or big veins that have been ruptured, it's not going to fix the problem. And that's what the Missouri Compromise was. It was a temporary solution for a really, really big problem. It'd be like if somebody has brain cancer. Yeah, they have a headache. If you give them Tylenol, the headache might go away, but it's not going to solve the problem at all. The Missouri Compromise just pushed the problem off for the future. Henry Clay also proposed the American system, which was high protective tariffs. Remember, protective tariffs are taxes designed to make sure that people buy goods from our countries. The money that it would raise would be used to make improvements to the United States. These improvements would include things such as paving roads and building canals. The first federal road project was made during this time called the Cumberland Road. It was a turnpike. A turnpike is a road that you actually have to pay to travel on. It's like the ones with the toll booths. The first canal that was made with this was the Erie Canal. It ran all the way from Buffalo, New York to Albany, New York. So Buffalo's right here, and it ran all the way across the state of New York to Albany. And then from Albany, you could just take the Hudson River and go all the way to New York City. So it really made the ability to take goods across our country a lot easier. 1824, it's time for a new president. But it was an extremely complicated election. There were 5 Republican candidates. And remember, in order to win the presidency, you need a majority. You need more than half. Presidential candidates, John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State. He's got some qualifications. John C. Calhoun, he was one of the War Hawks. He wasn't involved in the war, but he was a congressman. Got some qualifications, not as good as John Quincy Adams, though. Henry Clay, the Great Compromiser and a War Hawk, made the Missouri Compromise. He's got some pretty good qualifications, but remember, he's still not one of the 3. Andrew Jackson, war hero. So we've got a Secretary of State and a war hero. And then there was a 5th guy who was like a nobody. I don't even remember his name. He's got no chance. Calhoun drops out of the race to run as John Quincy Adams' vice presidential candidate, which kind of gives John Quincy Adams a bump. Well, in the Electoral College, here's the Electoral College map, and it's, of course, not going to let me click on it there. So, Electoral College map, we've got, there we go. So, here's the map. Really confusing, so we're going to focus on the pie charts over here. As far as popular votes go, John Quincy Adams got 31%, Andrew Jackson got 43%. As far as electoral votes go, John Quincy Adams got 84. Andrew Jackson got 99. So he had the most. But remember, in order to win, you have to get the majority. Since nobody got the majority, it is up to the House of Representatives to decide who's going to be the president. The House of Representatives, when they voted, the Speaker of the House was Henry Clay. Henry Clay put his support behind John Quincy Adams. And after Henry Clay did that, Henry Clay was named to another one of the stepping stones to the White House. He was named Secretary of State. So now we've got John Quincy Adams as president, John C. Calhoun as vice president, Henry Clay as Secretary of State. That leaves one guy out, and that is Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson got nothing from all this, even though he received the most popular votes and the most electoral college votes. If that happened today, there would be riots in the streets. Jackson accuses Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams of conspiring against him, which he probably did. Nothing he did was illegal, but it was definitely underhanded. It was definitely dirty. But because of that, John Quincy Adams became very, very unpopular. Andrew Jackson goes to the American people, tells them, thank you for voting for me. More of you voted for me than anybody else. I got more electoral votes than anybody else, but the House of Representatives says you're too stupid to choose. This also was the first ever election that the population of America was allowed to vote for president. So the first time they were, basically they just threw out their votes and said, you don't matter. Because of that, John Quincy Adams becomes very, very unpopular and is pretty much not able to do anything during his presidency. Your essential question for this lesson: why does the Missouri Compromise lead you to believe that there will be more problems in the future? Well, we talked about this. It deals with that line 3630. You had all the yellow above, or very, very little orange below. So make sure you're giving me specific details explaining what that means on how that can be problems in the future. If you don't quite understand it, you can rewatch the video, go back to that section and watch it. Email me if you got any specific questions. Hope you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I look forward to seeing you guys back next week. See you.